lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan, and back with me again, one of my favorite people in comics, Mr. Tim Sheridan is back. So happy to have you back on, dude.
Ryan, I'm so happy to be here. Like, okay, but before we say anything else,
Yeah.
you were the very first person to ever invite me onto a podcast as a comic book writer. First one I ever did.
Oh
And
shit. I think I remember
yeah.
you telling me that.
Yeah, you also connected me to a store here in the Los Angeles area, Collector's Paradise,
Yep.
where I've done a bunch of signings and things with them, and they're kind of my local, comic shop now. Anyway, so kind of like this whole comic book journey that I've been on, you were there for and were responsible for lots of pieces of it. So
Well, kudos to me.
and now I get to see you when I go to cons and stuff. Like you're always, your smiling face is always out there. So,
Yeah, thank
which
you.
is great.
No, I know. I love, I mean, I think I've been a fan of yours since you first started with all your stuff with Future State. I think it was right. Was it Shazam
Yeah, Future State was
Teen
the
Titans?
first. That was what a wild ride that was.
Yeah.
That was the very first thing. Titans and Shazam.
So I'm very excited to talk about. I think it's been a while. I think safe to say we can just jump into it. I think Flashpoint Beyond wasn't out. I feel like the last time we talked, if I remember correctly. So
No. Yeah, no, I don't think we've ever talked about that. Yeah.
yeah. So how did that project come about? It's you, your good friend Jeremy Adams, and then Geoff Johns, and you kind of revisited that. To me, it was one of my favorite books the year it came out. So and it kind of leads into what
Thank
you're
you.
doing now. So
Yeah, thank you. That was a wild thing that, Jeremy Adams, who was working on The Flash at the time, and I was working on Titans at the time, we had this idea for a story that was not like a big event, but like would bump up against an event, would sort of incorporate another event in the background.
mhm.
And we pitched this to DC and they were really into it. And when we pitched it, like, so we had this, it was sort of like the idea was it would be a crisis level event that was sort of in the background of this story. Somewhere in the process, I said to Jeremy, like, I think that we just need to name the crisis to make it easier for the pitch. And I think for our purposes and what we're trying to do, let's just say it's the Flashpoint. Let's just say it's Flashpoint, and that's the thing that we're dealing with. And I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever, it's fine. It's just for the pitch. So we did that, and then DC got really excited about the idea of doing a follow-up to Flashpoint, which wasn't exactly what we were pitching.
Mhm.
But then once we started having those conversations, Jeremy and I said, look, we would love to do this. Flashpoint is huge to us. It's formative for us. Not only the comic, but also for me, the thing that made me want to work in animation was sitting in a screening of the Flashpoint Paradox movie at San Diego Comic-Con in Ballroom 20. I was kind of a little bit at sea at that moment. And I walked out of there with my friend who we watched it with, and I said, that's what I want to do. Within a few years, a few years, I guess, I was working on with all those people who made that movie on the Reign of the Superman adaptation, which was wild. Like, it doesn't make any sense that I was able to get there, but I did. And so it's just been a part of my DNA and Jeremy's DNA. And so it made sense. But we said, look, if we're going to do this, we wouldn't do it unless we had a blessing from Geoff Johns, who we don't know. We didn't know him at all at that, in that moment. And they said, oh yeah, of course, we'll call Geoff and we'll make sure it's all cool. And he's, he make sure he's on board. So they talked to Geoff, and apparently what we were, the way they tell it, the way Geoff and DC told it was, Geoff said, I love it. I love the idea. Not only that, like I love the idea of doing a follow-up to Flashpoint. Like, kind of didn't, I don't even know if they pitched him the story we were working with. He said, in fact, I want to help. I'll write issue 0 and then help launch the thing. And we're like, really? So he's like, yeah, we'll all go get lunch. So then Jeremy and I are at a restaurant in Burbank. In walks Geoff Johns and sits down with us, and we're just these little fanboys.
Mhm.
And we had like, it was amazing. Like, we had the best time. I didn't know what to expect. I knew him as an entity and as a news story. And as a obviously his work, his body of work I knew, but I didn't know what to expect from the man. And I just, completely, fell head over heels with a talent crush, I guess, for that guy. And not only talent, but just like he's such a genuine, down to earth, normal person that we just hit it off. All of us did. And so we all got together. And the first thing that happened was, I think Geoff was like, you know what? Let's just all co-write the whole thing together. And so Jeremy and I are thinking, this is like a masterclass we're going to get to have in writing a comic book, which we never had. Jeremy and I came from TV
Mhm.
and got kind of thrown into comics at DC without ever having written a comic book, having read them, but have never having written one, and certainly never knowing about how the business of comics happens and how they're made and where we fit in that machine. So it was like it was delayed, but it was exactly the kind of thing you want when you're starting in the business, is to
Mhm.
work with somebody like Geoff, who has this pedigree and who knows the business so well, who's created so many parts of the business that we work in today. And so then we all got together and then we threw out the story that Jeremy and I were working on, because that was something we were working on, and we decided to come up with something completely new, all three of us together. And so that's what we did. We worked it like a writer's room in TV. The three of us would get together in Geoff's office, and he's got these huge whiteboards that, like, take up the whole wall. And, we just would dream about what that story was going to be and what we wanted to do. And, what was great was Geoff was always there to make sure that we had the balance that we needed. Meaning, Jeremy is someone who, his first instinct is, he writes from one direction and I write from another direction. Jeremy writes from plot, action, big ideas. And I start from the kernel of the heart of the thing and the emotion and what the relationships are and where that's going. And both of those things are necessary, I think, to make good comics.
Mhm.
And so hopefully the idea is we meet in the middle. And and then there was Geoff, who's great at both of those things and was sort of moderating it and able to make sure that we were getting both of those aspects into the story. ah, you know it, i I love talking about it. I've said a lot of the same stuff before, and I feel bad because I just love talking about how great a process it was for us.
I love
We
hearing
had
it. So
we just had the time of our lives. It's the most fun I've ever had, maybe ever, professionally, working in anything.
yeah, I love
Um,
hearing the writing
great.
room aspect because I want to write comics, but I wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily say I'm a writer. But to sit in a room with like, just shooting the shit kind of and like coming up with like a story, that to me sounds very appealing.
Yeah, and we had our editor there, and it was nice to just be able to run things through him, like, right away, and kind of check in and know sort of what his thoughts were and where we were going to land. It was very efficient ultimately. And but I learned so much about, like, just watching the way Geoff breaks a story on a whiteboard. And it was not totally dissimilar to the way I was doing it. What's funny is that Geoff, so when I came in, I got in on Future State and Titans Academy and Shazam right before Jeremy came in to do Flash, like just before. We had been brought in by Dan DiDio
Hmm.
to work on 5G. That was how we got in the door. And that went away. And we were kind of like, well, that was our shot. We're not going to work in comics at DC, I guess. And then we got a call to do other stuff. So I got this call. So I'm in the door. So I'm working with my editor. And I said, look, like right at the very beginning, I said, I don't know any, like, you got to send me a sample script because I've never written a comic book before. And I want to make sure that I can give you a script in a format that is something that you will understand and that you'll enjoy reading, hopefully. It's like, I can give you a TV script, but I know writers who've done that in comics, but I want to make sure I give you what you want. And I said, so can you give me a sample of like what you would want to get from a script? And he sent me an issue, a script for one of Jeff's Shazam issues.
Mhm.
And so I adapt. I mean, I almost the way I write a comic book script is almost exactly the way Geoff does, except over the years I've tweaked a couple of little things.
Mhm.
And I think, and so then Jeremy came in and he's like, I don't know what do they want? I said, oh no, I've got a Geoff Johns script. I'm going to send it to you. And then like you use that format. He's like, great. So we both started writing the way that Geoff writes a script. And so when we all got together, I think I don't know that Geoff knew that when we were going to go off and write stuff and then kind of share it with each other, that he was going to get scripts that he completely could read and understand because we had inadvertently learned from Geoff how to format a comic book script, you know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense why I like your writing and Jeremy's writing so much, because Geoff Johns, like, for the longest time, was my favorite writer. I wish he wrote more, and I understand he's a very busy man, but like it was a guarantee. I mean, it's still a guarantee. If I
Oh,
see his name on a book, I buy it.
I am,
But
by the way, I don't want to plug other, I mean, neither of us work for them, but like that Ghost Machine stuff
oh
is
my
so
God,
exciting for me. Like I'm
same.
so in. I'm so on the ground floor. I was as a fan, I went to the New York Comic Con panel and sat in the audience, like cheering them all on because I'm so excited about it. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, not to get off topic too, but like I was working the booth at New York and I couldn't go to the panel, and some like lady come up, like this guy and his girlfriend come up and they were buying something. I saw the ash can in their hand and I was
Yeah.
like, I didn't get to go to the panel. I want that. And she's like, here, take mine. And I was like, I love comics. I love comic people. Like, who does that? Like, she just gave me her
Yeah.
ash can
By
because
the way, I
like
would have
she didn't
gotten
want
you
it.
one.
I didn't think to ask. It just didn't cross
Yeah.
my mind. I saw it in front of my face, and then she's like, "Here, take it." But yeah, I'm very excited for
Yeah, it's great. And
Ghost
so
Machine.
it's really fun. And so like you said, Flashpoint Beyond, literally like in the story, you see where it planted the seeds for the new Golden Age books that we're
Right.
doing now. That I'm
Mhm.
doing Alan Scott, the Green Lantern, Jeremy's doing Jay Garrick, the Flash,
Mhm.
Rob Venditti's doing Wesley Dodds, Sandman. So that all grew out of that. And that's Jeff's genius. Like he was pitching these things and we didn't quite understand what he was saying, I think, when in the room on Flashpoint Beyond. But there were moments when we're just like, okay, great, whatever you think, Geoff. And that was
Mhm.
one of them. And then we didn't know what he was pointing toward. And then he ended up getting DC behind the idea of doing the new Golden Age books. And he called me and said, I think you should write he didn't say should, but he said, I think you've got an Alan Scott story to write. I think Alan Scott, as we understand him now, as a closeted hero in the 1940s, to set a book there to kind of revisit his beginnings. He said, I bet you've got a story. And we started kind of kicking it around a little bit. And we started talking about the Golden Age Red Lantern character and what that would mean. And then, that's it. So that's where I am now.
Yeah, no, I mean, we'll get into Alan Scott right now, but I have to say, like, when I heard it announced, I'm like, I sometimes like I'm very like cautious when they go back to the well, whether it's an old TV show that gets revived, a sequel to a movie that's like
Yeah.
30 years after. I'm like, what is
Yeah.
this going to entail? And it completely changed my opinion on books of that nature, revisiting, because it was something fresh, and the fact that it led into something got me super excited because I love the golden age of characters at DC. I love the Justice Society, and I was so mad that they weren't utilizing them. So to see it brought back in this way, and then the splintered off of the different miniseries, I think was such a awesome choice.
It's interesting. Flashpoint Beyond is so completely different than Flashpoint. I mean, it really
Yeah.
is its own thing. It sort
Hmm.
of benefits from, if you know the story of Flashpoint, and there are certainly Easter eggs and there's certainly pieces of that story that make sense when you understand Flashpoint. But really it's its own thing, Like in the very beginning when we were starting to talk about it, we said, like we wanted to focus on Thomas Wayne and I remember talking, we were all three of us in the room, and I said, if Flashpoint was about canceling or eliminating your grief, which in many ways that's what that story is, I said, then this story could be about how you move beyond it, how you live with it and move beyond it, rather than timey-wimey going back and fixing things to change history so you don't have to have that feeling of grief, but learning how to cope with it, basically. So
Yeah.
that's where the Beyond, I think, came from. And so those kind that so in that way, it has, you can see the connections, the sort of basic connection to Flashpoint, but it's its own thing. And so we had a great time with that. There's also such a fun world. Why wouldn't you want to revisit that timeline and sort of see, sort of check in and see sort of what else is going on? The stuff with, Wonder Woman and Aquaman and the Kryptonians and all that stuff is so interesting.
Yeah.
It's a shame that there aren't more of those books out right now. I mean, I would work on, let alone read, let alone work on a whole series, in that world. And we had lots of ideas. I had tons of ideas. Like there were characters who weren't in the original Flashpoint that I'm like, well, what are they doing? Where is, this person and where is this person? And we never knew. We never found out what they were doing. So that would be an interesting book. There's all kinds of possibilities in that. One of those possibilities was what we're doing with the new Golden Age, and the idea that there were characters who were taken out of the timeline and are being reintroduced into the timeline, and that is kind of affecting the stories of people that we've known for a long time, and stories that we think we know inside and out, but have now, we're in the case of Alan Scott, with the reintroduction of his classic nemesis, the Red Lantern, we're getting to see how his story might play out a little bit differently. Not that things, not that it reboots or changes his timeline at all, but it just adds a whole new layer and new context to him and his story. That's the idea. The idea is to, by introducing this other element, not to change the story, but to give it a little bit more depth and look at it from a new angle. Which is going to play out over the issues 1 through 3 are out now. Issue 4, 5, and 6, there's a little bit more of a little bit more context to that. The mystery in issues 1 through 3 is sort of solved at this point, and there's remnants of it, but now we're going to see how it affects sort of Alan Scott's life. Anyway, I love doing stuff like that. It's such a it's funny because it really is a very Geoff Johns thing. Like this idea of, this sort of very sci-fi idea of these people were removed from the timeline. And so it's a timeline that you grew up reading in comics, and it's influenced by the fact that these people weren't in it and should have been. And so now here they are, they're reintroduced. So in a way, when people are like, oh, this is a reboot, it's like, well, technically, the way the story is written, the reboot is everything you read up to this point for the last 80 years.
Yeah.
That was the reboot, which is a weird way of looking at it, but technically, that's the idea. The one thing I that drives me nuts though about Alan Scott in particular is that there are so many people who don't seem to understand and don't know or haven't read the comics in the last 10, 12 years. They don't know that Alan Scott came out of the closet in the comics. And so a lot of people are like, they'll come after me and they'll be like, this Tim Sheridan with his political agenda making our character gay, and I'm like, whoa, hey, it's like that happened before I got here, and they hired me to write a story from an authentic point of view about being a closeted hero in the 40s. I support that. I support what DC did.
To me, it's like,
I think we have a delay, by the way. I should mention right now that I think that we're having technical stuff, which is really fun.
We are. I like, for everybody, like I just don't want to like end the interview, but like for me, I see myself moving and then you are glitchy, and it's the reverse for you. You see me moving around glitchy probably, and you're clear. But yeah,
this is how it works. We all know. Everybody
technology
gets it.
sucks.
I just thought I'd call it out.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you called it out, because now I don't have to explain to people in the comments. I love Alan Scott. Like I said, the Justice Society, Geoff Johns is responsible for that love of those characters for sure with his run. But also I've always loved Jay Garrick, because Flash has always been my favorite. But Alan Scott, and he was utilized a little bit in the 90s in that Green Lantern run, not a ton, but I just love that he's getting a spotlight. And for people to get kind of hung up on stuff like him coming out is super aggravating for me as a fan and to watch online. I think people need to just chill the fuck out. Number one. Number two, it's like it to me, it makes sense kind of that if he were, he would have tried to like get married, right? And like kind of push those feelings down and like not, and the way you're handling it, I think is beautiful. I think the book has blown me away. Issue 3, I know I'm jumping past in issue 3, but that Spectre moment, I called it out when I reviewed my last pickups of the year. It was just phenomenal. The writing on it and that moment that he had was just something else.
Thank you. It's a, I definitely am taking liberties with people's classic understanding of the Spectre. I felt that we had a little bit of license in that he's only just died. He's only just become the Spectre. That there is it's sort of like in Doctor Who when he first regenerates and he's still a little doesn't quite know who he is and he's still figuring things out and he says things and does things that maybe seem out of character. And so I thought we had an opportunity to do that a little bit, which was great because it allowed me to be able to have him say some stuff to Alan that we needed to say to put it to bed so that we could move on with the story. And so I mean I'm my biggest fan on my interpretation of the Spectre. I'm like, oh, I would love to see more. I would love to write more of this guy. What's going on with him? There, a lot of people bring up the, what was it? Ostrander's Spectre. It's like 42 or something like that, where it was a very, I mean, I think it's an excellent comic book in the 90s that was about homophobia. And it really showed Jim Corrigan and or the Spectre's discomfort around gay people and trying to make sense out of that and literally going to Michael and trying to like get some guidance, some spiritual guidance about how he should be behaving and interacting with gay people. And it asked some really big questions, and I love, that's what I love when comics do that. I'm not going to apologize for, loving when comics ask big social questions that we're thinking about and dealing with, and maybe helping us sort of see things from another angle. There are pieces in the Alan Scott book that I knew were going to isolate a certain segment of readership if they read the book. A lot of people just, denounce it and won't read it for some reason. If they do, there are things that would be controversial to them that are not controversial to queer people. That we're like, no, this is our story. This is our history. And it's worth telling and telling again, because I just believe that that's how we all move through this life, is by hearing and telling stories to each other about who we are. I want people to get to know me better. I want people who don't have any queer friends to learn about what our story is like and how that story is similar to your story, and where we meet. Those are the best stories, the stories that show us that we're not all that different. And I think comics are a great place to do that. I will say this though, Ryan, I will say that while that's a great message, I don't know that I'm the best messenger to get that message out, because I also am very impatient. I just feel like, fuck you, like, get over yourself and read the book and learn something, or don't go fuck off. And that's not
why you're the good
really,
messenger.
well,
I
I don't
think.
know. I feel like there's part of that is not so great, like in terms of the message. Like I feel like, you know, giving people, a little bit of consideration and trying to draw them in might be a better, way of getting them to change their mind, maybe, or think of things differently. So maybe there'll be somebody else in the future who will tell stories like this, who will be more patient with folks. It's just, I'm a guy who's in his 40s who I'm just tired. I'm tired of, having to justify my equality to other people, having to earn my equality from people. It's like, who are you? Like,
Yeah.
I'm no, I'm no different than you are. So I've run out of patience for it in a lot of ways. I certainly ran out of patience for it right at the beginning of the run when people were like, just making up bullshit lies about the book and putting stuff out there, and this whole cottage industry of writing these BS articles about things that weren't happening in the book, and to try to, influence public opinion away from it. And I just was like, some of my responses to people were pretty curt back then. I was just like, okay, fuck off, block.
Yeah.
And then like chain block, like anybody who follows this asshole, I don't want them to. So I think I was a little bit too trigger happy in the beginning. And so then I started to ease into it a little bit more, and I realized, no, we may as well just keep my head high and, keep telling the story. And it's found, it had an audience, and it found even more of an audience. And I'm really happy, I'm very proud of it. It's a great, it's a great experience working on this book. I've never written a character who was a main character who was an out gay, well, not out, I guess Alan Scott, he's out currently in continuity,
Hmm.
but at the time he wasn't. But I've never written an explicitly gay character as the lead in a book before, or anything before. It's been a great experience, and this team has been incredible. I love working with the people that I'm working with. They're some of the, like, Key and Tormey is, I think he gets better with every issue, and he's
I
doing the work
agree.
of his career,
Hmm.
which is, it's just nice to sort of sit back and watch that happen. I'm not really, I can't take any credit for it. I'm just kind of watching him do the thing, and it's great. It's nice to have a partner. This isn't always the case in comics. Maybe in indie comics you find this more, but certainly at least at DC, it's been my experience, or working on licensed stuff when I've done like Masters of the Universe. It's not the kind of partnership that people might think it is. It's not always like that. Sometimes you're kind of siloed, and you're doing your job and they're doing their job, and then a book comes out and everybody, it's great. Or it's not. But I made a point in the beginning to really work with, to involve and just try to work on the same level with Kian and bring him into the story, where my head was, and what are his ideas. I mean, the first scene of the first issue of Alan Scott is something that came from Kian. One of our first meetings, he said, I had a vague reference to J. Edgar Hoover in like issue 4 or 5 of my outline.
Hmm.
And he said, and he'd read a book called Gay Washington. Like he's a he's a real history buff, and he knows a lot about US history for an Irish man. And he said he just had a lot of ideas, and he said, what if, you really feature J. Edgar Hoover and like involve him in Alan's story, and what would that look like? And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the opening scene of the book. That's kind of tells me everything about the setting, where we are.
Hmm.
Where is Alan's head at this moment? What is he up against? And I'm very grateful to him for that, because it really helped me find my way in to the first issue, certainly. And it ends up being, it's really the spine of the whole story is Alan's reaction to, or no reaction, as we see in the first scene of the book, to J. Edgar Hoover's, dare I say, advances, which I
Yeah.
mean in a political sense. However, he also is a creep, as we saw at the end of that scene. Like, he says something really skeevy,
Hmm.
which, which is not un J. Edgar Hoover like.
No, I think that, you'd mentioned it when you were talking about the way you write, and, how you come at it from this little kernel of like what's at the heart of it. And I think that that's super evident in this book, and there is so much heart in the writing, and it is a very emotional read. It's not
Yeah, don't come for
necessarily,
the action. Like,
yeah,
I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's not that kind of book. It's a 6-issue miniseries exploring what it means for your secret identity to have a secret identity.
yeah.
And, while there is some action in the book and more in the back half of the run, that wasn't, I think people, if you came for that, I'm, and are disappointed, I'm sorry, but we're telling a different type of story. There are so many great action comics out there.
Hmm.
Like, there's room for other kinds of stories. So hopefully hopefully people who came for the action, who've stuck around, are enjoying the human interaction in the story.
No, that's what I love about it. I came for three reasons. I came because you were writing it. I came because I love Alan Scott, and I came because I wanted to finally get the story of his experience because they did drop it and I think it was in the Rebirth special where
Yeah.
like he comes out to Todd, his son, right? And but we never really got to kind of explore that this entire time. It hasn't really been like none of the JSA characters have been explored. So to kind of get that backstory and to see stuff that I didn't know necessarily about like history because you are juggling DC history with reality. And
Yeah.
it's a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And it is, at times it's upsetting to watch, like to see like another human being go through something that's really unnecessary because of what society kind of tells them is right or wrong, like
What I find the tragedy of Alan certainly in the first three issues, the tragedy is that it's not really, aside from J. Edgar Hoover and his blackmailing, everything that he's going through, he's bringing on himself in that it's because he checked himself into Arkham. Like
yeah,
it's because of how he sees himself that he is, and it's because of how he sees himself that he's so skeptical of the police in issue 3 and is not willing to, he can't see the truth because he's so ready to be skeptical of their motives. And so all of that is he's kind of bringing on himself because of the feeling that has been instilled in him by society and the
mhm,
way they would view someone like him. So there is an outside force acting on him, but in the end, he is the master of his fate. He is the one who sort of put himself in this situation. That to me is more tragic than even the story of Billy in issue 2, where something is done to her by society, which is
yeah,
terrible, but and it's tragic. But then the other layer for Alan is he didn't have to go to Arkham. He did that himself because he
yeah,
doesn't like who he is. And because that's what he's learned, and that's what people knew. That's what people thought and felt in many, almost everywhere at that time. So
mhm,
there is great tragedy. There's great darkness in the story, but it's a story about a guy who, becomes the embodiment of light.
yep.
And so we have to start in the darkness so that we can then show his sort of growth and, how he becomes a beacon for everyone.
Yeah, I think also the reveal with like the Red Lantern and the connection with Alan too, I think is pretty cool. And I mean, I've loved every issue, but the third issue just like knocked my socks out. Dude. I
That's
just
my favorite
absolutely,
issue. I love the third issue.
yeah, it
I
was
love
really good.
Spectre. I love the way that he puts together the clues at the end of the
Hmm.
story, which have been like, you know, a lot of people I've seen some people be like, I saw this coming a mile away. I'm like, yeah. Like that's of course you did. Like it wasn't like supposed to be a big, huge shock. The thing that's supposed to be a little more shocking, but not shocking, but it's supposed to leave you with a question mark at the end of issue 3 is, why he's speaking Russian.
Yeah.
That's like, although if you've read the Who's Who page that Jeff wrote that came out in the New Golden Age #1 a while back, that explains who the Red Lantern is. It's a little less of a shock at that point,
Hmm.
but if for anyone, it's like, oh, I knew it was going to be him, but wait, why is he speaking Russian?
No, I'm very excited for the rest of the series, and I just think it's I'm not trying to say I don't like the other Gold Age, but the Alan Scott one has been my favorite so far because like
I mean, oh, that's very nice.
he's the one I know the least about in terms of like my knowledge of Alan Scott. Like I've always liked him as a character, but Jay Garrick I know a ton about. Wesley Dodds I know a ton about, but there hasn't been in the modern day a lot of stuff done with Alan Scott, so it's
And
cool
to
to see him get.
your point, like that was one of the things. Like he hadn't had a title in almost 75 years. But I
Mhm.
also think Jay Garrick hadn't either. Like it wasn't like, that's exclusive to Allen. Like that happens. But we have learned more about Jay over the years. Jay has been around. Um, not that Alan hasn't been around, but I think that Alan's gone through so many different things in continuity, so many different versions of his story, and so it can be kind of confusing. And then, like you said, he came out of the closet and he's made sort of guest appearances on a couple of pages here and there in other things, but we never really got to live with him and see sort of what his story is, or at least parts of his story. So that was the thing that excited me about it. I said, okay, that's interesting. Like, this is a piece of the lore that is just dangling out there right now that is in need of some kind of fleshing out. And so that was the exciting prospect for me to get to do it. Happily, we had a story summit for the New Golden Age where the editors and Geoff and Rob and Jeremy and I all got together and we all pitched each other our stories. And happily, like, I had written out this story and I pitched it and everybody was like on board. They all thought it was great. And I said, you're insane. Like, this is 20 pounds of story in a 5-pound sack. Like, there's no way I can do this. There's no way. And that's where editorial comes in. And they mostly have just been encouraging. They're like, no, you can do it. And Geoff, I think in that summit was like, yeah, but you're not thinking about omniscient voice and like, how you're gonna be able to bridge these scenes. Well, this whole section that you're talking about, that's like 1 page, and I'm like, okay, all right, maybe I can do it. And still every day I'm working on this book. I'm like, this is too much stuff, there's too many ideas. This should have been a year-long series.
Well, I think you're
least.
knocking it out of the park so far. So I can't wait for the back half of the series. I'm very excited. I do want to ask though, it is a 6-issue series. Do you have any plans for any other comic books? Any other ideas that you want to do?
I'm working on another book right now that hasn't been announced yet. But I'm almost done with that. And otherwise, I still work in the world of TV and film. Like, that's kind of where that's my first job. I have a lot of ideas, but I don't know that anybody is gonna ask me to write them.
Like
So
your
we'll see.
creator-owned ideas.
I certainly have creator-owned ideas, so that is definitely it's on the horizon. It's on the horizon, or not. Like, I mean, it's kind of like I hate to answer like this. I'm so sorry, but
It's
it's
fine.
the kind of thing where if I got staffed on a show, or if one of my shows got picked up that I have to run,
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow, it really wouldn't leave me. My bandwidth is such that it wouldn't leave me a lot of time to really focus on creator-owned comics. So
Okay.
I can't say it wouldn't happen, but it's kind of like dependent upon my life. Maybe I will. I mean, I guess that's a real luxury to be able to sort of like, there's a lot of people who are doing this to make a living, and I have what I tell people is, if you want to make a living, for God's sake, don't go into comics. you
Yeah.
know, we'll see. Like I said, I have ideas. I'm doing another book for another publisher right now that'll be announced. Actually, I don't know when this is going to be out. When is
Probably
this going
this
to
week or
be?
next. It
Oh, this
might
week
be
or next?
tomorrow. I
Yeah,
might
probably.
actually drop it tomorrow, to be
You
honest
just
with
drop it
you.
tomorrow. It's
Yeah.
not, yeah. So it hasn't been announced yet, but it'll get announced like in the next week or so. And then but that's just that's a mini series, and what a terrible answer to your question.
It's
Like,
fine. I mean,
the
look,
answer should
I
be like,
get it.
oh my God, you're gonna be so excited. Here comes this thing.
I
I've
know
been
every time I ask this question, more often than not, I'm not gonna get an answer on camera, because like you guys can't announce everything, right? You have to wait till
well,
the
okay,
powers
but
that be do.
let me give you a serious answer though, right?
Yeah.
Which is to say this: there is a piece of me that feels, as much as there are people like you and there are some great fans out there is a piece of me that is sort of like, some of the feedback that you get from people can be so disheartening in comic book, from people who I think don't really understand how the business works at
Mhm.
all. That it's sort of like if you had a choice, and I do, you know, comics aren't always the most fun place to be a writer. You know, that's a real serious answer.
Mhm.
And so I hate that. I love comics so much. And it's sort of like this. So this is like you've loved comics your whole life, right? And you just got a job working in comics,
Mhm.
like working for a publisher. And there is a danger when you do that to suddenly the thing that you love is now your work and your job. And there's all kinds of stuff that comes along with doing a job that makes it work and not fun, right? And
Mhm.
so there are things about the comics business that are not fun. And so it's a tough decision for me about how and when or if I really do much more in comics. I don't know. We'll see. People have been really nice. There've been some really nice people, and Alan Scott's been a great experience. Um, you know, but it's a personal decision that who knows. Someday I'll have a story that just has to be told in comics and I'll tell it.
Okay, I want you to stay in comic books, but I hear you on the noise, and I think that while I know it's easier said than done to like ignore it, I can understand how it can just be like, I can't I can't deal with you idiots anymore. Like you guys are just like so frustrating, you know?
It's tough, like people look at people's jobs. I think Joe Biden always talks about this, right? Your job isn't just a job. Like it's your sense of self-worth and your
Yeah.
value. And that's how we sort of have these measurements about our lives based around our work. So whatever you can do to sort of take care of that,
Hmm.
you should do. And sometimes, like I said, it's the least. I've worked in movies and TV and comics, and sometimes the least fun place to be a writer it can be in comics sometimes. So I really do. I hope it changes.
So do I. But until then, you can still go pick up all three issues of Alan Scott Green Lantern and jump on board right now. You can hit up Collector's
Yep.
Paradise, who has a signature series there. I'll drop that link down below and make sure you
Yeah.
pick up the next few issues. And thank you again, dude. I always love talking with you. So it's always a
And
blast.
I love talking to you too. I'm going to be doing some conventions too, which is really fun. Like so I'm if this drops this week, I'm in Portland this weekend. I'm going to be doing Cleveland coming up and Toronto and I don't know where else. But I one of the things that I love most about working in comics, since I talked about things I don't like, let me just say one of the best things about it is doing conventions and meeting fans face to face
Mhm.
because there's nothing that gives me more energy than meeting amazing fans in person at cons. So please come say hi.
Yes, go say hi to Tim. Go buy the comics. And dude, I know I'm gonna be hitting you up again soon, especially when that other book either drops, announced, or both. I don't know. But thank you as always for your time, and I look forward to doing this with you again sometime.
Thank you for having me, my friend.